Salvage, a story by user Rantarian. Chapter 35. Same place, same time. Kavaris, Kortai Directorate Core World. Goftik had never hoped that he wouldn't drown. The entire concept of drowning had never seemed like it might happen to him, since the parts of Kavaris he lived in were not the parts that contained significant amounts of water, unless you counted the decorative water fountains in the city's park spaces. It had been so much more reasonable to hope that he wouldn't be attacked by hunters, or to be struck in the street by a stray street cab, or to be assassinated by rival corporations. Compared to those very real dangers, drowning seemed somehow pleasant. It didn't seem that way anymore. The blue-haired creature had called the process waterboarding, an innocuous-sounding name at first. Goftik had scoffed at the threat, as he had scoffed at their demands to reveal all of his secrets. The Chinasho thug had threatened his life at first, but the blue-haired creature had denied her whatever justice she thought she would be getting, and for that Goftik had made the mistake of underestimating him. He had imagined that without the fear of death, there could be nothing to torture beyond simple pain. The first waterboarding had immediately freed him from his ignorance. He had expected their questions, but none had come, just the sensation of drowning over and over. Then there had been the second time. Again, no questions. Goftik had heard his race, the Kortai, called cruel, but they were merely practical to a fault, just as he had heard the hunters called cruel. And while that could be true, they were primarily driven by the hunt. But the blue-haired man looked upon Goftik with cold, implacable eyes, even as he begged for his life, and there was nothing in them but his singular purpose to cause pain. The third time, Goftik had begged them to ask their questions again. He had thrown aside his pride, along with any of his desires beyond not being repeatedly drowned. And then they finally listened. Askett had been watching the process of interrogation with extreme discomfort. He had never before witnessed acts of torture, but from what he had heard it was normally performed by cutting into people with knives or other extremely harmful methods, or at the very least by forcing them to watch such things being done to others they care about. He had never imagined a method that contained all of the horror of those methods, and none of the lasting injury. It hadn't even taken an hour before Goftik had been begging for Adrian to stop. The human had ignored Goftik's pleading until he was satisfied, and had returned Goftik to the room they were keeping him in. The Kortai businessman had been kept in there for a full day before Adrian had dragged him out, and Askett felt his discomfort grow. But then the businessman had finally broken, had begun to offer them anything they wanted, and Adrian had stopped. Then he had begun to ask the questions again. "Who have you been paying in the Directorate?" Adrian had asked, and Goftik had answered with the list of every name who had accepted a bribe from Orators Industries. The list was short, but Goftik had been eager to give up the information, and it contained the names of some of the most influential politicians in both the Directorate and the Dominion, as well as within the Kelsey Alliance. "What have you had them do?" Adrian had asked, and Goftik had answered with all of the things the company had pressured the politicians on its payroll into doing. Decisions intended to protract the war and win Orators Industries its major weapons contracts. "Who else is involved?" Adrian had asked, and again Goftik had provided every answer he could, ranging from the senior employees of his own company to those of others, from the officials who served their corrupt masters to the men who ensured that nothing got in their way. Adrian had paused when Goftik had given the name Cameron White, and had looked to Godugan, who had thus far been happy to watch the Kortai businessman suffer. "That's a human name. Tell us more about him." "Cameron White?" Goftik asked incredulously. "He's just a hired killer. We have a man who uses him to take care of investigators who get too interested in our business." "He killed my husband," Godugan replied coldly. "On your orders." The Kortai businessman looked between the two of them with disdain. "I don't deal with that sort of thing directly," he protested. "And besides, Cameron White is a savage even amongst humans. Too unstable for my liking. He causes a lot of collateral damage and demands an exorbitant upkeep. Last I heard, he was sent into Alliance space to sort out a problem we have there, in the hope that maybe they might take care of him for us." "How can I find him?" Godugan asked. "All I know is that he was supposed to be finding some pirates who have been causing problems for the Alliance," Goftik replied. "Call themselves the Zoddersill, or—" Adrian moved like a blur, faster than Askett had ever seen him move, and with such genuine rage that Askett felt his stomach knot in cold dread. The human clamped a threatening hand on a terrified Goftik. "What about the Zoddersill?" he demanded with such ferocity that Askett could see Goftic's will to resist crumble in a surge of raw terror. They're just pirates, Goftic stammered out. The human who used to lead them managed to convince the Dominion War Council to employ them to disrupt Alliance trade, and they've gotten very good at it. We had to put an end to them. Please, they were only pirates. Adrian leaned in close to the terrified Kortai and looked to Askett as though he had intended to whisper. I'm going to tell you a little fucking secret, fuckhead, he said, softly, but with an edge that even made Askett fear for the Kortai businessman's life. The Zodasil pirates are my crew. You sent a deranged fucking human after my friends. He stepped back from the Kortai businessman, letting the cringing little man enjoy some kind of slowly dawning horror that Askett didn't understand, but he made a note to investigate. That's impossible, Goftic answered hoarsely. That human is dead. You're supposed to be dead. Gadugan stepped in. I want to follow this Cameron White. I will have my revenge. Adrian nodded. Good thing I'm already packed. Date point: 2 years, 9 months after Vancouver. Erbzerk Orbital Factory, main station. Cameron White had been surprised by the mice. That didn't often happen, and it was usually very amusing when it did. They would make some little plan, take some meaningless action that they'd have invested all of their hopes in, and then he would take it apart and crush it. Normally that occurred only shortly before the mice shared the fate of their plans. That was not the case today. He had already been aware of the increased number of surveillance cameras traveling the streets. Those had to have been the idea of the redhead who refused to come out of her freighter, and he had taken steps to ensure that he was never around when they were. Then he had been given a stun gun of his own, along with every other militiaman, to use against the dangerous human if they were to encounter him. Cameron White had used that weapon to hilarious effect in 2 of his demonstrations since then. He hadn't known how the weapons might work on the Xenos, and he had been very excited to try it out. Turns out they just killed them, but the corpses twitched and spasmed for minutes after. The terror on the station had filled the air like humidity on a tropical coastline, and the Xenos were close to breaking. Their sad excuse for a society was on the verge of breaking down and turning into a mob intent on driving the redhead and her group of mice from the station forever. Like everything else, that was no longer the case today. Today they really had surprised him. They had at last discovered him, for a moment at least, and he had been forced to put down the whole of his militia group before they could react. He didn't know why they'd attempted to arrest him instead of simply killing him by surprise, but that was their mistake. Cameron White had been forced to withdraw, and that was a rare and exciting thing. Now it was he who was playing the part of the prey, hunted by every militiaman, soldier, or policeman in the entire station. He wasn't even sure how they'd figured it out, but he felt that he could attribute most of the blame to that cheeky red-headed bitch. She had somehow seen through his clever distractions and his schemes, proving herself more clever by far than he'd initially given her credit for. She had only herself to blame for how violent it was about to get, but his mother had taught Cameron to always look for the silver lining. Today that silver lining was that Cameron no longer had to hold back. Oh, he said with the greatest pleasure, today is a very good day. Jen stared at the map of the station. There were militia patrols everywhere now, but they were disappearing with an alarming regularity and reappearing in broken mounds of flesh. At first, this had been mysterious, and then the psycho had allowed himself to be caught on camera. Whatever costume he had worn was now removed, and she could see him for the jug-headed bruiser he was. Every bit the stereotype of the psychotic English football fan, with an extra helping of psycho. He had recorded his sick work, and he had dedicated it to her, and he had released it to the station. The mood on the station following that was not good, but at least it was directed at the man behind the killings. The public had a face to blame now, and they were as angry as they were terrified. But they were also looking to Jen for the answers on stopping him, and her plans to do that had rather fallen through when the militia had completely cocked the whole thing up and allowed him to escape. They'd paid dearly for their error, as had everyone the madman had killed since. They were also looking at her to take him on, thinking that there could be no great difference in strength between 2 Deathworlders. That was their ignorance, but it made them think of her as a coward, which she may well be, instead of considering other options. It's time to consider the use of nerve jam grenades, Jen said to her few crewmen. Do they have any on the station? A few, Tricor replied, but they're not a military station. They are dangerous to use, Cheer warned. But you already know that. and I think that we really are that desperate.
We've had luck narrowing down his position with 15-minute reporting periods, Zrypov told them, but it comes with a dreadfully high cost. What use are the stun guns if the men can't hit him with them?
That is not my issue,
Karr rebuked.
I made the guns as requested. I cannot be expected to ensure everyone knows how to use them properly. Nobody is blaming you, Karr,
Jen assured her.
But I am interested in knowing if it would be possible to give them a wider spread with more distance. Not without weighing the soldiers down with more power chambers,
Karr replied.
I was initially hoping to do something like that, but they simply can't lift the guns.
I'm not sure we have time for that anyway, Zrypov said. How long before he comes after us? He's still toying with us.
You can't be suggesting that we leave, Cheer asked. He will butcher the people here without our help.
He's doing that well enough without it,
Zrypov retorted.
I don't want to join them. Is that so wrong?
What we need is some help from the military, Cheer said, with proper anti-tank weapons and more than a handful of nerve jam grenades. But the only ship that's docked recently just came in, and it's just a little passenger transport ship.
Poor bastards don't know what they're walking into, Jen said sorrowfully. I hope nothing happens to them while they're here.
Askett had been keeping a good eye on the human. Before interrogating Goftik, he had seemed casual and friendly, almost carefree even when he was ramming a street cab through a foyer. Now he was focused like a blade. The contrast was as striking as it was terrifying, and neither he nor Gudugin were willing to do anything that might cause him to turn his anger against them. They had left as soon as they possibly could, after putting Goftik into protective custody and paying a visit to Margarita. Now, at the very least, Adrian had a plasma ball launcher to go with his no-fucks-given attitude, not something that Askett would ever want to be on the receiving end of. And now they stepped off of Goftik's generously loaned private transport onto a station full of hurried steps and furtive glances. The sense of fear here was thick in the air, and it even made Askett's heartbeat quicken. What are we going to do? He asked, hoping that Adrian would decide to answer.
I'm going to go and end a man's life, Adrian said coldly. Gudugin will want to be there, but I want you to look into something for me.
Askett swallowed, hoping the demand would not be too unreasonable. What is it?
I want you to find out if some people are still alive, Adrian said tersely. Tell me right away if you find out they're not.
Askett didn't ask why. He'd seen enough of how the human had treated Goftik for any delusions of human nobility to have disappeared along with Goftik's dignity. Askett did know one thing, though. He knew that when Adrian found the man who was trying to kill his friends, and Askett didn't doubt that he would, that man would have some very bad final moments. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one today. I hope you enjoyed that chapter. Thank you so much for spending your time here with me. I know it's valuable, and I really appreciate it, guys. So, we've got a few more chapters of Salvage coming up. As soon as I get back from the road trip with my mom, taking her back down to her house, I will probably be doing some different, interesting videos that will still be centered around storytelling and things like that, but we might mess with some formats and things like that, maybe include some visuals to go along with the audio, that kind of thing. I'm not sure yet. I just have some vague ideas, and we're going to try them out and see if they work. They might not. You might never see those videos. Maybe I don't even need to be telling you about them, but they may be coming. I really appreciate you guys being here with me. Big shout out to my newest patron over on Patreon, Iced Molasses. Will be added to the list of orators there on this video. So thank you so much. We're up to $42 a month now, guys. I can't freaking believe it. We're almost halfway to the goal of $100 that I initially set a couple months ago, and I cannot believe it. That blows my mind. Thank you guys so much. When we do reach that $100 goal, I'm going to be doing a patron-only video. So if you are not yet a patron, you should go over to my Patreon and hit that up, because the video is probably going to be something ridiculous, because it will most likely be a viewer-requested video where they ask me to do something strange. So, yeah. Thanks again, guys. I hope you had a great time. I did making this one today. I'm really excited for the conclusion to this one. It's got a lot of crazy stuff going on. So, thanks again, guys. I will see you in the next one, and I appreciate you. Bye. Ooh.